Mr. Speaker, as always, it's a great honor to rise and speak for the people of Timmins, James Bay, and I'm very proud to be speaking on Bill C-52, a piece of legislation that is very important for this House, and it is, I would like to put in an editorial parenthesis, Mr. Speaker, that it's nice for a change to actually be debating legislation that has something of value to the Canadian public as opposed to so many of the bizarre hot buttons sideshows we've been dealing with. The issue of rail safety is a serious concern. The government needs to respond. We saw the horrific disaster in Lac Mégantic, where so many lives were needlessly lost, but we're also dealing with a huge increase in the transport traffic coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan in terms of the carrying of unprocessed oil, crude, bitumen, and we saw in the Lac Mégantic spill the oil that's coming out of the Bakken fields that is very combustible. These are issues that have to be taken very seriously. And as I say that, it's not just the oil industry that is involved. Most of our industrial sectors, many of our industrial sectors have an important role to play in their connections with the railways. I live across the street, literally across the street from the Ontario Northland, and every day the huge sulfuric acid tanker cars come down from the smelter and run their end to Quebec. We have had spills, and those are catastrophic spills. But, Mr. Speaker, the kind of spills that we've been seeing with increasing regularity as the increase of traffic is coming, particularly in the oil sector, has raised many, many, many issues about safety. We've had in my own region in the last few months 3 derailments, one at Hornpain, 2 at Gogama, one that has spilled heavy crude into the Matagami River right at the site that I've been led to understand that is fish spawning grounds. There's been so much work done in that section of the Matagami River to build a better ecosystem for fisheries, and to see this heavy crude burning in the Matagami River, it's a travesty, Mr. Speaker, and it's an economic and environmental tragedy for the people who live along the river, and in fact, all the people who live in my part of Northern Ontario, because the Matagami is such a large river system. And there is not a lot of comfort from the promises of CN or Transport Canada that they will suddenly make this all better again. The minister had said they'll restore it 99.99%. Well, I find that rather hard to fathom, how crude spilling into fish spawning grounds can be remediated that easily. We look at what happened in Kalamazoo, Michigan, when the Enbridge pipeline burst. For 18 hours after the alarm started sounding in Edmonton that there was a problem, no action had been taken. That blowout destroyed a large section of the Kalamazoo River. 5 years later, the water is still damaged, and it's cost over $1 billion in repairing the environment. So these are serious, serious issues. We have to just go back a little bit to give people historical explanation. Before we had this huge increase in tanker traffic, there was a belief that pushed by the Liberal government of the day that if you allow self-regulation, well, boy, everything will be better. It's this blind belief that capital suddenly somehow had a sense of public duty, that if we pulled out the inspectors, we pull out the inspectors from the meat industry, if we pull out the inspectors ensuring health and safety, if we pull out the inspectors of the railway lines and allow the companies to self-regulate, well, people will make more money, and somehow that would be a social good. And we saw that Transport Safety Board has talked about the weak safety culture that's existed, both at Transport Canada and within the companies. That serious issues have been raised to the point where, after the latest Gogama spill, the Centre for Biological Diversity had said, and I don't think it's that unfair to say, that the oil and railway industries are playing Russian roulette with people's lives and our environment, given the fact that the transport of these goods cut through the center of so many communities in our country. Now, that being said, Mr. Speaker, we have to ask ourselves, what is the long-term solution here? One of the arguments you always see from the Conservatives, if there's a rail derailment, some kind of accident, any issue about transport of oil, they'll immediately jump and say, ha-ha, we need pipelines. The NDP need to stand up and support pipelines. That's a bizarre, false argument, Mr. Speaker, but I'm not surprised that the Conservatives say it, because there's so much the puppets of the large oil interests, but I've been noticing more and more that my colleagues in the Liberal Party use that argument time and time again. I was actually shocked that my colleague from Trinity Spadina spent yesterday, when we were talking about rail safety, he was talking pipelines. I don't think he understands that you don't have to have either or. What you have to have is public safety. However you choose to transport goods, and we are a nation of transporting of resources, however you transport those goods, it has to be done where safety is put ahead of expediency. And for my colleague in Trinity Spadina, who believes that the NDP is wrong on our concern about pipelines, we're saying that the issue with pipelines is the same issue with rail transport. What are the public protections that are in place if we're going to be moving raw bitumen through 40-year-old pipelines? That's a question that the public needs to have answered. Whether they're concerned about Line 9 in the city of Toronto, whether they're concerned about the pipeline plans through the mountains of BC, the issue of safety, where are the shutoff valves? What kind of oversight is there going to be? What kind of remediation measures could be put in place to stop a blowout? If you have a blowout in the BC mountain ranges, how are you going to remediate that? It would be impossible. We know that. If Line 9 blows out in Toronto, how could you assure the safety of the community? So it's a false argument to say that the New Democrats have to choose between pipelines or rail. No, we say that whatever method is going to be used to move the nation's natural resources, the issue of the safety of the public has to be part of the discussion from day one. There's, of course, a larger long-term issue in terms of safety with the Canada's oil industry that needs to be looked at. That what kind of nation has a vision for economic development that takes raw resources and ships them 1,000 kilometers to put them on ships in the St. Lawrence to ship them to China to be processed? That is a bizarre, short-sighted view of economic development. We have enormous resources in this country. We have to look at value added, because when we do value added, we're not only creating jobs, but we're also ensuring that the transport will be safer, because we're not dealing with the unstable, on-process, back in oil being transported. We would process it in Alberta or Saskatchewan and then move it. The issue of transporting bitumen, as we've seen from the Kalamazoo River catastrophe, that bitumen is very, very different for cleaning up than oil. These need to be balanced, and the best way to deal with that would be to have the upgrading and the processing at source. So this is a long-term vision issue that needs to be addressed. And my colleagues in the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister, who's going to create this energy superpower, we've seen after 8 years of this kind of hyperbolic talk that it hasn't come to pass because there hasn't been the necessary equal commitment to environment. That we become more and more of an international outlier on these issues. If you're going to be developing non-renewable resources, you have to show that you do actually care about the environment. So when President Obama turned down Keystone XL, much to the chagrin of the leader of the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister, when you look at what the EPA said about Keystone XL, that it was not in America's interest, and that the effect of Keystone XL would be to add another 1.37 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that the United States was looking at this government and saying, so, for all your blunder and your bless on your energy economy, what have you done to ensure that you are balancing that with a long-term environmental vision? And this government had nothing to offer except more blunder and bust, and they're not taking no from an answer from Mr. Obama. Well, President Obama and the Democrats' response is talk to the hand. If you are not going to balance environment and long-term security, then they are not going to partner with you. And in our transport of oil and our natural resources, which we've been abundantly blessed with, what we're saying in this House is that we have to balance environment, sustainability, and public safety, that we cannot shortchange public safety, because we simply cannot tolerate, and the Canadian public will not tolerate, another tragedy like Lac Mégantic. So I support this bill. I think it is a first step, but we have a long way to go on addressing this issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.